Good morning, good afternoon, good evening upon where you are. Welcome to the FAO webinar to present the regional review of aquaculture for the Asia Pacific, which is the first one of the 7 similar webinars this week. My name is Weimin Miao, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Thank you all for joining us here. We will start with a welcome remark from Matthias Howard, the head of the aquaculture branch of FAO's Fishery Division. Matthias, please.
Well, thank you, Miao Weimin. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good day to all of you. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, which is the first in a series of 7 consecutive webinars. And there are a number of important reasons for FAO to be organizing these events this week. First, the year 2020 has kicked off with a reaffirmation of our global commitment and call for coordinated and accelerated actions towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. So what role can and will aquaculture play in this decade of action? What actions should be prioritized for a better impact of aquaculture, particularly for the Zero Hunger goal? These are key questions we had wanted to discuss at the FAO NACA Global Conference on Aquaculture Millennium Plus 20, which was supposed to be held in Shanghai this week. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to postpone the conference, and in agreement with our host, the Chinese Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, is now scheduled for new dates 22 to 27 September 2021. Now, proposing future actions for greater impact in aquaculture should be informed by sound knowledge, by facts and figures. And that brings me to my second point. At FAO, we have been compiling these reviews since 1995, every 5 years. And we are about to complete the 2020 edition right now. So providing our latest results to you, as we had planned to be done in Shanghai, is precisely the background and purpose for engaging with you now. So what will be presented today are the key messages, the challenges, and the options for the way forward in the Asia-Pacific region, the powerhouse of aquaculture. Presentations and discussions with distinguished panelists representing different stakeholder groups will complement our agenda. And I believe we can all look forward to a very interesting and stimulating exchange. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Matthias, for the remark. Fully elaborate the background and objective of this webinar. So the webinar today will start with the VIP opening remarks, which will be followed by a presentation by the author on the key message emerging from the regional review. Following that, there will be a video display of interventions by the panelists, then a short question and answer session. Before we start everything, 2 housekeeping notices. First, please use the question and answer box on your screen to submit your questions. Second, please note that this webinar will be recorded and shared online afterwards. So without further ado, we'll begin with the VIP opening remark from Mr. Kim Jong-jin, FAO Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for Asia and the Pacific. Mr. Kim joined FAO in 2013. He was the Deputy Minister for Trade at the Ministry for Food, Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries in the Republic of Korea. Before being appointed for his current position, Mr. Kim was the Director of FAO South-South Cooperation Division and a Deputy Regional Representative for Asia and the Pacific. Ricardo, can you please play the video now? Thanks.
Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished participants, colleagues, it's my great pleasure to take part in the opening of this webinar. As the FAO regional representative for Asia and Pacific, I have the particular honor to highlight the remarkable success of the Asia-Pacific region in the development of this aquaculture sector. The region has a leading position in the global aquaculture industry, and where aquaculture has surpassed capture fisheries as the source of fish for direct consumption. The Asia-Pacific contributes over 90% of the world's aquaculture production. In addition to contributing to improved food security and nutrition, aquaculture provides livelihood to nearly 20 million farm families and about the same number of job opportunities in the service sectors. The Asia-Pacific region covers an extensive geographical area that encompasses a great diversity of social, economic, and agroecological conditions, cultures, as well as governance systems. This diversity has no doubt made the task of reviewing the status and trends of the region's aquaculture sector a great challenge. This is the primary message of the regional review of the aquaculture in Asia and the Pacific that you are considering today. This review, one of 6 regional aquaculture and the State of World Aquaculture 2020, is prepared for the Global Conference on Aquaculture Millennium Plus 20 to be held in September 2021 in Shanghai. I commend the individuals who have pooled their knowledge, experiences, efforts to develop this review of regional aquaculture status and trends. Dear colleagues, as the impacts of climate variability and the change, and currently of the COVID-19 pandemic have demonstrated, our food production systems are vulnerable. In this regard, increasing the resilience of these systems and taking care of these do not contribute to or widen inequality should be a priority. The growing record of achievements is steady progress towards a science-based production system, its integration into the broader social and ecological system, its increasingly harmonious interactions with agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and other economic activities, and its contribution to social and economic development have been comprehensively documented in the global and regional reviews. It is clear that the practice and the governance of aquaculture can contribute to reducing social and economic disparities and serve as a catalyst to increase in and the spread of welfare and prosperity in societies and among nations. As part of the finalization process for the review, I urge you to direct your efforts at refining your recommendations towards ways and means by which aquaculture does not bring about the conditions or exacerbate the pressure that widens social inequality. I should like to point out that FAO, association with the global and the regional partners, has been a driving force for global aquaculture development. In the region, FAO has supported members through regional and country projects and the organization of regional policy and strategy consultations. Most recently, a focus on and blue growth has covered a range of subjects such as modernizing aquaculture policy, the management practices, animal health, feed and seed, and the farming system. FAO's support has also covered capacity building and food safety, market information, climate change adaptation, disaster preparedness, and risk management. In closing, I would like to emphasize that FAO will sustain and indeed strengthen its support to countries in sustaining economically viable and socially responsible aquaculture growth. This is in accord with the organization's primary objective of contributing to the attainment of Sustainable Development Goals. Congratulations once again on this impressive body of work. Our best wishes to the success of our endeavor and to our good health. Thank you very much.
Great thanks to Mr. Kim for his opening remarks, which highlighted the continued contribution of aquaculture growth in the Asian Pacific region and the major driving forces for such development, and assured continuing support of FAO to its members in achieving sustainable growth of aquaculture sector for great contribution to the SDGs. So now I would like to introduce Dr. Yuan Ren, the lead author of the Asia Pacific Regional Aquaculture Review. Dr. Yuan is a senior program officer of the Network of Aquaculture Centers in Asia Pacific. Dr. Yuan will present the key message emerging from the regional review. Dr. Yuan, please share your screen of your presentation. Okay, Dr. Yuan, we can see your screen. So the floor is yours now.
A good day, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to present the regional review of aquaculture development in Asia Pacific. The review entails analysis of status and trends and its silent issues and its perceived future development. The authors include the late Professor Saina de Silva, I myself, and a few colleagues who made significant contribution to the content. And we thank FAO to provide all the support, provide information, data, and most importantly, relevant officers provide very critical reviews on the, in the course of the drafting of this regional review. The geographic coverage of Asia Pacific region is quite diverse and big, large, and geographically in its flora and fauna, culture, and economically. The region includes the two most populous states in the world, China and India, and the middle part of the Asia continent and the Australia continent, some landlocked countries, and small islands, mostly in Pacific Ocean. Fisheries and aquaculture are socio-economically important for most of the nations in the region. And aquaculture has its roots and its long tradition in the region. The analysis of the status and the trends basically is based on the FAO fishery statistics updated to the 2018, and some information is extracted from the FAO food balance sheet. We also based on the information of the FAO publications, especially previous reviews, some journal articles, and also some national statistic data. And these are some very continuous trends compared with the previous reviews. First one is production. Aquaculture production in Asia Pacific continuously increased in the past decades. And the second, aquaculture Pacific continue dominated the aquaculture production in the world, and with China as the largest contributor. And there are more than 300 species currently being cultured, and the top 10 most productive species constantly actually contributed more than 40%, both in production volume and production value in the past 10 years. Finfish continue dominating both production volume and the value. Crustaceans have the highest production value per unit. Regarding the culture environment, marine culture had the highest production volume, while freshwater aquaculture had the highest production value. This is basically because marine culture, major contribution of the production is from the seaweed. And in terms of the production system, so the Asia Pacific has the most diverse aquaculture systems, and ranged from the extensive, semi-intensive, and the intensive culture, all practiced ranging from the small-scale backyard family fish pond to highly industrialized, technological, sophisticated commercial operations. Cultural facilities include the earthen ponds, tanks, cage pens, rice field, and in some areas, raceways. And also we have the monoculture, polyculture, integrated culture, and are all developed depending on the resource available and the species, all species combination. Both closed and open systems exist with various degree of the water treatment or water recycling through the recirculation. And some remarkable changes happened in the past 10 years. And the first one is development of the new emerging species. This is a very good example from the China. 3 species, they have phenomenal growth in the past 10 years, include the Chinese meeting crab and red swamp crawfish and yellow catfish. And there was also slow down of the annual growth in the past few years, especially in the past 5 years. And we also noticed the stagnant market price in the last 3 to 4 years. I will not present all these data, detailed summarized data and the figures, as I really don't have enough time to do that. You can find all these tables and data figures and in the review, which will be made available online. You can check for into the details. Rather, I will focus on the key messages I scooped up from this regional review. The first key message is aquaculture in Asia Pacific continuously increased in the past decades, while the growth rate slowed down in the recent years. So this is the first figure. You can see the steady growth in the past 10 years and the continual slow down of the annual growth rate happened especially from the 2012. Since 2012. The annual growth rate in the past 10 years averaged at 5.2%, but in the 2017 to 2018, the annual growth is only 2.1%. Asia Pacific remain dominant in the world aquaculture production, with China as the largest contributor. In 2018, the aquaculture productions in Asia Pacific reached 105 million tons, and with which China contributed 58%, and Asia Pacific, include China, contribute more than 92%, actually 92% of the global total. However, there is a great disparity and imbalance in aquaculture development among the sub-regions and the nations. And as showed from this figure, East Asia is the mainstay of the aquaculture production, and followed by Southeast Asia, which contributed about 23%, followed by South Asia, contributed about 10% in 2018. And the rest of the nations and territories contributed less than 1%. And probably there are some reasons for this imbalance, contribute to this imbalance and disparity. First one is diet traditions, which are widely varied and different between different nations and communities. And also there is a limitation of the land and water resources, especially in some landlocked countries, lack of proper services such as feed and seed production and supply, technology and animal health management, etc. The options for the way forward include the further, we should integrate aquaculture into the national development strategies for food and nutrition security with policy and resource priority given to ensure its sustainable growth. And we should step up for the propaganda to raise awareness of the nutritional benefit of eating fish and develop local consumer market. And we should strengthen the regional collaboration in capacity building, technology transfer, trade, and investment. Aquaculture is a major contributor to achieve SDGs in Asia Pacific. In 2018, aquaculture produced a total value of the $223 billion US. It's a big business, provide employment opportunities for nearly 20 million people with the equal number of the people employed in related support and service sectors. And fish consumption in Asia is higher than the world average. In 2017, the consumption per capita reached 24.1 kilogram, and more than 60% of it is contributed from aquaculture. It provides about 25.2% total animal protein intake in Asian diet. And of course, it's most important sources for micronutrients, especially for less privileged populations, rural populations. And we should also notice, it should be mentioned here that in Asia, there are quite a lot of small households, and their aquaculture is their essential livelihood activities and income source. The next key message we got from the review is that Asia aquaculture actually has a well-established feed and seed supply systems, which supported the continued growth of the sector. However, there are also some challenge issues. And the first one is dependence of the supply of the major aquafeed ingredient on import, variation of the seed and feed quality, often associated with the small-scale producers, poor access of the small-scale farmers to cost-effective and quality seed and feed. Options for the way forward include to promote development of the local available alternative ingredients and scale up the production to reduce the dependence on the external supply and to lower the feed cost. And to promote the adoption of the innovative feeding techniques, practices to improve feeding efficiency, support capacity development in local feed and seed production, regulate the hatchery practices by setting the enforced relevant standard, build technological and management capacity of the small-scale hatcheries for good hatchery practices. And the region also has a quite fairly well-established aquatic animal health management. And in most of the major aquaculture producing countries, which played a vital role for the sector sustainability. And most of the nations had a strategy set up for the aquatic animal health management, and some monitoring the surveillance and warning system were established in many Asian countries. And also the capacity has been improved constantly to provide the service to farmers, and recently include some remote diagnosis and treatment, etc. And some achievement also being made in the methodologies technologies for accurate and the fast disease diagnosis. Regulations were strengthened and practices shifted more on prudent use of the antimicrobials and other drugs. There are some issues also. First one is a large number of the drugs and chemicals which have been banned, but we did not actually develop the needed substitute. And there is also weak local capacity in animal disease diagnosis and poor proper treatment, and limited progress in development and application of the vaccines and the immune stimulant. Options for way forward. Strengthen the local capacity building include the establishing, monitoring, and early warning systems in supporting farmers to effectively handle aquatic animal diseases. Support the development and adoption of the effective technology and treatment of the aquatic animal diseases, include vaccinations. Adoption better farming practice as a primary effort for disease prevention and control. This is the basic and primary most important approach. And the increased regional trade is another, including increasing international trade, and it's another development trend in the region, and impacted, which have impacted the aquaculture sector both positively and negatively. And Asia, in this region, a lot of countries, many countries actually, they are the major, most important exporters of the aquaculture products, and also the importers. And increasing requirement on the food safety and quality on imported aquatic food actually promoted certification, traceability, and improved farming practices. And trade contributed to economic growth and job opportunities through the extension of the value chains. Some issues also existed and include the increase in stringent food safety and environmental standard. All these things have become, in sometimes, a barrier for small-scale farmers to access international market. And international market demand also very volatile and very sensitive to the trading conflict and change of the trading environment. And this is a major threat to farmers overly depending on the international market. And also there was basically the poor return to producers invest cost to meet the increasing stringent standard. Now options for the way forward we're thinking about is the encouragement of the diversification of the market, including boost the domestic market, promote straighter into a regional trade, diversification of the commodities. And the government should put up the effort to facilitate the access of the small-scale producers to the mainstream market, promote fair trade, and call for the consumer support to the effort for sustainable and safe aquatic food production and supply. And the region need for information to improve resilience and better efficiency of the aquaculture sector. So this information system, this information focus on the system improvement. We will develop some of the new systems and which are more resilient to the climate change and other disasters such as the pandemic. And innovative value chains development and with the structures and logistic systems to adapt to the changing market demand and mitigating risk of the various disasters, which are integrated with the e-commerce such as big data support, etc. Innovations that improve environmental performances and resource efficiency is also a focus. And innovations in alternative feed and feed ingredient, new feeding technologies should be emphasized. The region has actually improved its aquaculture governance, which are vitally important for overall sector sustainability. At current institutional frameworks and aquaculture development have been established in major aquaculture produce countries in the region. Regulatory work covers the important aspect of the aquaculture. Development and application of the BMPs and good aquaculture practices with participatory approaches and employment of the small-scale farmers. And the certification has been widely applied to aquaculture of the various species, aquaculture product, farming systems, production process, and value chains. Market incentives associated with certification have gradually been recognized, and the certification has increasingly been a persuasive form of the market governance that help to improve aquaculture sustainability of the region. And some silent issues include some countries, especially those where aquaculture is still in the early development stage, still lag behind in policy formation, legal frame establishment, institution setup, and development of the relevant regulation standard. In some countries where policies have been developed and implementation somehow hampered or delayed by lack of the human resources and financial support. In addition, dominance in the number of the aquaculture farms by small-scale farms in the region, many of which are still resource poor, imposes difficulties in monitoring and enforcement of the aquaculture regulations. Insurance scheme in general have not been properly established in most Asian nations for most major cultured species. And likely options for the way forward include continuous update, improve and develop aquaculture related policies and regulation standards and strengthen the implementations. And the region need to invest more in capacity building to develop human resources and provide sufficient financial support to make aquaculture governance more effective and efficient. And develop policy and policy instruments to assist small-scale farmers in access the resources, technologies, and community management. And develop relevant policies, legal provisions, and financial support to establish insurance schemes for aquaculture through collaboration and partnership of private and public sectors. The region really need to assist the small-scale farmers because they are the backbone of the regional aquaculture. Some issues related to small-scale farmers include the they have less privilege to access to the resources such as feed, seed, finance, services, and market. And they also lack the resilience to risk factors such as disease, natural disaster, and market conditions. And they are often unfairly treated in sharing of the benefit in value chains. And they have difficulties in compliance with standard regulations and certifications. And we need to build capacity for small-scale farmers through training, information dissemination, and technology extensions. We need to develop policy instruments to facilitate farmers' access to resources such as finance, insurance, and market, promote farming community development through cluster development of the cluster farming and farmers' cooperatives. Some priority issues and development strategies are listed here. And some priority issues and include resource and environmental constraints, vulnerability of the sectors to external risk factors such as extreme weather calamities associated with climate change and other major hazards such as pandemic, for example, the COVID-19. Disease threat by so far is still a biggest threat for the industry, and there is a vulnerability of the small-scale farmers. And some strategies to keep for the way forward include the mainstreaming aquaculture development into national development policy and strategies in resource allocation and planning, strengthen the regulations and environmental impact of the aquaculture production, include standard setting and enforcing, support development and adoption of the farming technology and practices that increase productivity, minimize environmental impact, strengthen national and local early warning systems and different hazard and disasters, preparedness of the sector and disaster relief system and mechanisms. And the region needs more collaborations between institutions and between nations and to support the sustainable growth. And this includes the strengthened collaboration between the international and the regional organizations, and for example, FAO hand-in-hand initiatives, strengthen regional cooperation in promoting aquaculture development in underdeveloped areas such as SDGs through regional networks such as Network of Aquatic Centers in Asia Pacific. And we need to enhance the public-private partnership and SMEs in promoting sustainable growth of the aquaculture development in the region. Thank you very much. I hope I did not take more time than expected.
Thank you, Dr. Yuan, for this presentation, which highlights the major trends and of the aquaculture sector development in the region, and also the contribution of aquaculture growth to the major SDG in the past decade, and the remaining challenge and the way forward. Thank you for keeping the presentation concise, which help us in manage the time. To complement the presentation by the author, we invited 3 prominent figures in the region's aquaculture sector as panelists for this webinar to share their insight on specific aspects of aquaculture in the region through pre-recorded video intervention. It is now my great pleasure to introduce you the panelists. Mr. Tarun Shreda. Mr. Shreda is has distinguished career in public services for more than 35 years in diverse sectors, including agriculture, fishery, etc. These include fisheries and aquaculture both at provincial and the federal level of the government. Mr. Shreda is the former secretary of the Union Ministry of Fisheries, Animal Husbandry and Dairying, and the Union Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare in India. Mr. Jimmy Robert is the aquaculture advisor of the Pacific Community, managing SPC work program on aquaculture by providing technical support, advice to 23 SPC member states and territories, including governments, investing authority, and the private sector on aquaculture development and management. Ms. Shirley Maria Antoni Sami. Shirley has been heading Inforfish as acting director since May 2016 and become the director of Inforfish in December 2018. Shirley brings with her 20 years of experiences in monitoring reviewing the Asia-Pacific fishery industry, carrying out consultancy related to international fishery trade and promoting international fish trade and markets through sharing data and information and coordinating international and regional events. All the panelists are with us today. They will answer the question received before and during the webinar after the video intervention. One of our panelists, Robert Jimmy, has some technical problem with her camera, so we cannot see him, but he's with us. So Ricardo, can you please play the video now?
Distinguished delegates, very warm greetings. My name is Tarun Sridhar and I'm from India. I would very briefly speak on a limited issue as to why, despite the fact that South Asia has emerged as one of the hubs of aquaculture in the world, the level of fish consumption remains significantly lower. And could aquaculture play an important role in helping in increase in fish consumption in this region? And what is it that the governments could do to assist in this area? You see, traditionally, there have been regional variations all across the globe as far as fish consumption is concerned. The pattern of consumption of animal protein is directly related to the income levels of the people, as also the level of awareness of the health benefits of fish and other animal proteins. Secondly, the areas which have large coastlines have a higher fish consumption than areas which have been landlocked. One of the reasons in South Asia, apart from the poverty levels and the low levels of income, have also been historical and the cultural and social regions, especially in India, which is one of the biggest countries in South Asian region. And it's quite a paradox that India, despite being probably the second biggest fish producing nation in the world and the second biggest aquaculture producer in the world, still has very low levels of fish consumption. Partly the reasons are social, partly reasons are cultural, because large sections of societies also have a taboo with the consumption of animal meats and animal proteins. However, this is not an area which I would give much concern to, because things are very, very rapidly changing. Number one, we are in a slightly data poor situation. When we talk in terms of per capita consumption in this region, various different figures come up, right from 4 kgs per capita to 11 kgs per capita. So we are in a slightly data poor situation. But there are certain very significant trends which are emerging of late. One of the trends which are emerging is that the health benefits of fish and the level of awareness and urbanization have led to a very exponential increase in the consumption of fish. And I agree that aquaculture has had to play a very, very significant role in terms of making fish, good quality fish, available. You see, the distinct advantage which aquaculture has over capture fisheries is that you can control the production and the supply chains. The capture fisheries was so far suffering with the inadequacies of good, healthy cold chains and supply chains, so that we had one production center and another consumption center. So there was a huge mismatch between the consumption center and the production centers. With aquaculture, things have changed, and as I see the trends emerging in South Asia and especially in India, the fish consumption in the urban as also rural areas is increasing by leaps and bounds, and aquaculture has had to play a very, very significant role in this. And aquaculture has also emerged as a very good alternative farming activity. So apart from livelihoods, it's also emerged as a major source of animal protein. Secondly, on account of this very unusual, bizarre situation all across the globe on account of the COVID pandemic, there is a significant shift towards the local consumption. So locally produced food is going to be the preferred food item. So with aquaculture, this trend is going to be further strengthened. So you see, so far the governments had this, and governments and the industry had this obsession with the global trade, fish trade, exports. Now there is going to be a shift from exports to developing domestic cold chains and the domestic markets. This is also going to significantly improve the fish consumption in the South Asian region. So I'm very optimistic as far as the increase in fish consumption is concerned. And rest assured, in times to come, South Asia is not only going to be a hub of aquaculture production, it is also going to be a major center for the consumption of fish and fish products. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience.
Hello, I'm Robert Jimmy, aquaculture advisor, and I'm in charge of the aquaculture program for the Pacific community. The Pacific region has great need and potential for aquaculture development. The progress in aquaculture development has been limited despite significant efforts of partners and governments. What have been the major hindrances, and how do you see the prospect of aquaculture development in the coming decades in the region? Key factors that hinder or affect development have been limited suitably trained human resources due to high turnover of trained staff at the national level, which affects the growth of the sector, high cost of production due to limited raw materials that are available nationally, and the need to import major raw materials overseas, a lack of dedicated legislation that enables aquaculture, limited market opportunity, the risk of spreading resources in trialing out too many species rather than focusing on those that are economically viable. I see prospect of aquaculture development in the coming decades in the region in strengthening capacity at the national level and the need to come up with a long-term human resource development plan, not just for the government, but that supports private sector development, strengthening networking and collaboration for technical transfer of expertise and knowledge exchange of aquaculture, improving policy framework to strengthen development in aquaculture and provide an enabling environment for private sector investment, strengthening markets for products in domestic markets to meet demand for fish locally, and more focused on development by supporting limited species that have been evaluated for market acceptance that are potentially profitable and suitable for remote locations. Thank you.
Now, international trade of aquaculture products has actually strengthened over the past decade, and this is actually being driven by the strong and consistent demand of fish and seafood in the region. We have among the highest per capita fish consumption rates in the world. Fish forms a very important part of our diet, particularly the protein contribution. This has really been the driving factor for the sector. Shrimp, tilapia, pangasius are the main species that are farmed in this region. And thanks to Vaname, shrimp is now affordable to consumers, and it's also easily available. So that's great. People love to have shrimp nowadays, and of course, because it's easily available. It's farmed in most Asian countries now, and also we are also one of the main suppliers to in some of the processing regions, particularly as far as Latin America. Tilapia and pangasius as well. It's more and more entering the domestic market from the producing regions, and we're also seeing more and more the presence of fillet of tilapia and pangasius being consumed by Asians. So that's an interesting development as well. Now, how should the industry cope? Definitely through diversification and innovation, and using technology to assist. Now, recently WTO has revised their rate of contraction in global trade to 7.2%, and expected to grow by contraction rate by 9.2% this year, and to grow by 7.2% in 2021. They had earlier forecast that trade is going to contract by between 13 and 32% this year. So this is a development really showing signs of recovery slowly. Now, the lifting of lockdowns and opening of borders have been the main factors contributing to this recovery. Of course, market diversification has become even more important. But importantly, also, we need to understand that checkings at borders and requirements at borders are also now being even more important, and it could be posing obstacles as well. So focusing on the domestic markets are probably the best bet right now, particularly with governments prioritizing food security. In local markets, in most of the Asian countries, Asia-Pacific countries, efforts are really being put by producers and suppliers to get the fish and seafood across to consumers through all means. And in this endeavor, they are prioritizing the use of technology. Online shopping has become the trend now, even more. There are all kinds of methods are being used with using technology in order to get the fish across. So this really tells us how important it is to supply to the local market, and there's really a lot of development taking place. The focus should be now on how to cater to the consumers. Affordability, convenience, longer shelf life, and variety. This is the way to go, getting what the consumer wants. Innovation and technology is definitely crafting and molding the path to this recovery. I call it the adaptation phase. This is going to characterize the growth of the industry from now on, at least for now, temporarily, and should be tapped on. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions and queries if there is. Thank you.
Thanks to all the panelists for sharing your insight and knowledge on the specific issues of the region's aquaculture sector. This brings us to the Q&A session of our webinar now. So we're taking questions from the Q&A box as well as some that were received earlier. So our first question today is for Dr. Yuan, the author of the regional review. The question is, the aquaculture growth in the region has slowed down significantly in the past decade. What is the implication of such declining growth rate? Dr. Yuan, you have the floor. Due to time limit, try to respond to the question within 1 to 2 minutes.
The slowdown might be considered as natural because the sector has grown into more matured after almost 4 decades fast growth. And several factors, I think, contributed to this. First one is the increased scarcity of the land and water resources. Second, increasing stringent environmental regulations that have forced many farmers to cease their operation while barring entries of the many newcomers due to the increasing entry requirement. The third reason probably is growing competition from other food production sectors, especially livestock and poultry industry. And fourth probably is middle apparent slowdown in aquaculture production in China. It is really difficult actually to predict that at what level the sector should continue to grow. But one would expect that the protein intake in diet of the human population will continue to increase. And the total demand for the food fish will increase also with the growing population. As such, aquaculture in the region should and will have to grow continuously to meet the increasing food fish demand. The growth, I think, however, will be mainly through the sustainable intensification with better productivity and environment performances. The growth will focus on the quality rather than pursuit of quantity, with the due consideration of the environmental integrities and social responsibilities and so on. And the slow growth, on the other hand, coupled with the increasing demand, maybe still stimulate the aquaculture growth in other regions, for example, in South Asia. So I fully agree with our panelists. And in South Asia, we would expect the fast growth of the aquaculture in the years to come. So this is just my thinking in short time. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Yang, for the brief and clear response to the question. Our next question is for Dr. Shrita. The question is, Dr. Shrita, can you further elaborate what can be the role of the government in promoting aquaculture growth and fish consumption in South Asia? Dr. Shrita, please.
Thank you, Meow. Sorry, I had not unmuted my mic and I started speaking. I'll divide the question into two parts. First is the government's role in promoting aquaculture, and second, the government's role in promoting fish consumption. You see, first thing the government could do with aquaculture is shed this bias towards agriculture and give aquaculture the same status as it is given to the agriculture. There is a very distinct bias in governmental policies all across the world towards crop husbandry rather than fisheries and aquaculture activity. So first thing would be that aquaculture should get the same priority and the same respect in the governance and political agenda as the agriculture sector does. Secondly, I think there has to be a paradigm shift. When we talk in terms of aquaculture, we talk in terms of food and nutritional security and livelihoods. Let us have a paradigm shift from livelihoods to a viable means for economic prosperity. Because various studies and many studies of FAO, which I have been going through, have shown, especially in the South Asian region and in my country, India, which is the biggest country in the South Asian region, that the returns from aquaculture are probably 4 times what you invest. And whereas the crop husbandry and agriculture has been growing at a very stagnant rate of 2 to 3%, aquaculture has been consistently growing from 6 to 9%. So these are the things which government should not only recognize, but also place in the public domain and place aquaculture very high on the governance and political agenda. And I think most of the questions Dr. Yuan in his very excellent presentation has already answered. You also need to build the institutional framework and the capacity so that the basic ingredients like feed, seed, the technology is accessible to the common farmer, and especially the small scale farmer, which is the mainstay of aquaculture in South Asia. I think government should basically look at these things in terms of, number one, I'll repeat, according priority, number 2, high on the governance agenda, number 3, creating an investment climate wherein the ingredients and the basic inputs are available, number 4, access of technology to the small farmers. Second part, I'm trying to be very fast, Meow. Second part is what should government do in terms of increasing fish consumption. I'm very clear on this. It is not for the government to try to influence the dietary habits of the people or their food preferences. Now, aquaculture and fish consumption by itself fish is itself becoming a preferred food of people in South Asia because of the various health benefits, because of rising middle classes, etc. Now, particularly India, again being I'm repeating, India again being the biggest country in South Asia, has a distinct disadvantage in terms of fish consumption, that a very large section of our society is what we call vegetarian. The consumption of, as I said earlier, consumption of meat or fish is a taboo. Even people who consume fish or meat do not consume it on a regular basis. Some maybe once a week, once a month, etc. However, what governments could do is, number 1, remain objective and unbiased towards this cultural taboos between consuming meat and fish and not consuming meat and fish, number 1. Second is place in public domain the health benefits of fish. Place in the public domain the scientific and authentic information as to how fish is a better source of nutrition than other foods. And thirdly, most importantly, which I mentioned in my earlier statement also, we have fish production, we have consumers, but somehow the fish is not reaching the consumer in the absence of effective supply chains. And if it is reaching the consumer, it is much reduced in value in terms of its nutrition and in terms of its quality. So government should create this environment through appropriate policies and infrastructure that we have very good effective supply chains so that the production center can make the good quality and fresh fish available to the consumption center. These are my initial thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shrita, for the very important recommendation. So our next question is for Mr. Jimmy. The question is concerning the regional networking aquaculture development. In your view, how can NACA and SPC do more to assist the development of aquaculture in the Pacific? Robert, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for the very important question. I think in the past we've had very good opportunities in being able to for the region to collaborate through the great work that NACA has been undertaking with respect to short-term training and capacity building and so forth. I think what the region probably needs is to be able to gain that additional exposure in terms of looking at a bit more structured exchanges and trainings in the future with regards to areas such as South-South exchange program that could possibly provide an opportunity for mid to small scale farmers in being able to gain that exposure and knowledge and training that Asia has to offer, especially to address those limited areas around feed and seed and so forth. Looking at ways perhaps to gain exposures, especially through expertise from Asia with regards to the areas around business mentoring and exchanges to farmers that could perhaps provide support in terms of addressing technical areas and capacity around that area. I understand in this part of the world there's been efforts in looking at developing small-scale farmers into cluster approaches as similar as to how Asia has a lot of experiences on. But I think being able to get farmers to get that exposure in how best to improve on the way cluster farmers operate and associations, I think would really benefit the region, and also looking at some structured technical attachments and trainings from this region looking higher to Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Our next question is for Shirley. The question is how the aquaculture sector can be better prepared for risk similar to the COVID-19 pandemic. Shirley, please.
Thank you, Miao. Yeah, it's a very interesting question and timely also. Well, I think we should not put all our eggs in one basket. Market diversification is definitely something that we should look at. Although there is still this sort of potential border delays going on with now additional checks and requirements. But definitely we should consider how we can actually diversify markets by looking also at niche markets, which will actually sort of reduce our competition as well as cushion these effects. The local markets should definitely be targeted and should be strengthened as well. One other thing is to have product diversification. If you compare the type of fish, the way we eat fish in Asia right now has tremendously changed over the past decade, I would say. Traditionally, as Asians, we tend to go for whole fish, fresh fish. But now, we actually consume more frozen fish. We are looking for fillet. We are looking for steaks, portions. I want my fish to be easily prepared so I can cook. I want ready to cook kind of fish. So this gives you a wider option to target also consumers. And I think that's definitely something that should be, we should be looking more in order to strengthen the local market. Also, keeping up in technology, as I touched earlier in my video, that at this point, we really don't know how long this COVID issue is going to be. No one can actually say. Borders are not open yet in most countries. So selling fish online, when I'm talking about local market, selling fish online is something that is most of the producers and suppliers are looking at. So using technology to promote or strengthen the domestic market is one of the things that we should be looking at, because really we are not sure whether this COVID is going to go off or rather people are already getting used to buying fish virtually, sort of, online. So this is something that we should be looking at so that the demand, because the demand is still strong for seafood in this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Now, can I request the Secretariat to read the one question selected from the Q&A box? Hosting?
Thank you, Miao. We have one question from Mr. Ortega. He writes, may I suggest FAO to compile best practices in aquaculture business model development, cases that have demonstrated integrating smallholders into the domestic and global value chains?
Okay. Can I direct this question to probably to Mr. Tarun? Will be pleased to respond briefly to this question.
I would surely respond. Could you just repeat it slightly, because there was an echo in the sound and I was not able to.
Sure. Mr. Ortega writes, may I suggest FAO to compile best practices in aquaculture business development, cases demonstrate integrating smallholders in the domestic and global value chains?
Thank you. I think this is integrating the smallholders into the value chain is a huge challenge everywhere. Now, what should be the integration look like? Integration should be based on the principle of equality and access for the smallholders as much as it is for the big holders. Now, integration models we come across, what happens is that the big player integrates the small people, but then the small holders become captive of the big people. And I think this is one of the key messages in Dr. Yuan's presentation was this also, that there should be an equal access of technology and practices as far as the small holders are concerned. Now, if we are able to achieve a good integration based on ethical principles of equality in terms of technology practice and an equality in terms of access to markets, I think this would be a win-win for everyone. And as Shirley also mentioned very effectively, the message is that now the preference has to shift towards domestic markets and local markets. The trends are very, very clearly visible that there will be a preference for locally produced food. So we need to also integrate in terms of moving from wet markets, which have been the mainstay of Asia, towards frozen and semi-processed or processed products, basically value addition. And value addition would be possible if there's an integration wherein the smallholder also has access. But let me tell you, it's a huge challenge because of the fact that the aquaculture sector in South Asia is highly disorganized. It's a highly disorganized sector. And secondly, whether it is, FAO or NACA or everything, there's a huge, within aquaculture, huge bias towards shrimp culture or brackish water culture, high value species. The common carp, the poor carp, Indian major carps, the poor fish gets neglected. Like the smallholder gets neglected, the carps, common carps, which are the mainstay of livelihood of farmers, get neglected. So integration would mean integrating this whole gamut of fisheries and aquaculture, this thing, into the markets and the technology and inputs. But it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge. I don't know. I don't have ready-made answers as to how to achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharida, for sharing your views on this issue. We are actually receiving a large number of questions from the audience. Due to time limit, we won't be able to address more questions in this seminar. However, the Secretariat will note down all the questions and pass them to the author to consider in finalizing the regional review. So I will now ask Mr. Matthias Howard, the head of aquaculture branch of FAO, to give some final thoughts and closing remark for the webinar. Matthias, you have the floor, please.
Well, thanks very much again, Mia Wai Min, and thank you so much to all our speakers and panelists today. This brings us to the end of the most interesting webinar covering a lot of ground in the region with by far the highest aquaculture production. I will be brief. I'll just mention a few points that struck me as take-home messages based on these presentations here. Well, first of all, I think that The Asia Pacific region has clearly consolidated its dominating position in the global aquaculture production with over 90%. And over 80 in production, over 80% of value. I think we can congratulate the region for a significant contribution of aquaculture growth to food supply, but also to nutrition and to rural livelihoods and providing job opportunities for many, including women and youth. I think we noticed here that member governments have made great efforts and achieved significant progress in improving the governance and good governance of the aquaculture sector for better environmental performance, for food safety, but also for social benefits. And that has been achieved through updating fisheries laws with strengthened provisions for aquaculture, but also the prudent use of drugs and chemicals needs to be mentioned here. Then there was this discussion about trade, and I thought this was really interesting and important because global trade has been such an important driver for the region, yet with the pandemic now, we see much more emphasis on the domestic markets, and it will be very interesting to see how the pandemic will further influence this. And then there was a point on resilience and the fact that the region maintained the good growth of aquaculture, yet the sector is still so vulnerable to extreme weather events associated with the impact of climate change and other hazards, outbreak of major aquatic animal disease and the current COVID-19 pandemic. So an urgent need to adopt appropriate strategies and take effective actions to build resilience. Finally, 2 points. Aquaculture in this powerhouse in the Asia Pacific region is so diverse, not only in farmed commodities and farming systems, but there is also a great disparity in development across the sub-regions and the countries. And it is timely and needed to develop appropriate strategies to actually bridge those gaps in aquaculture development. And I'm really pleased with the words of our Assistant Director General and Regional Representative, Mr. Kim, who stressed that FAO stands ready to support the countries. And we sincerely hope that FAO's hand-in-hand initiative initiated by FAO Director General Chu Dong-yu will contribute to such effort to boost the aquaculture development where it is needed and has good potential as in the small island developing states. And finally, let me say that the aquaculture sector is expected to contribute more to the achievement of the relevant SDGs through sustainable growth. And with this changing socio-economic context that we heard about, and with the climate change and other uncertainties, transformative changes of the industry through innovation in many fields, in technology, in farming systems, in best management practices, supply chain support, but also more conducive policy support will be the way forward. So these are what I took down and a few more of the take-home messages. And the next step for us will now be for our focal points, to continue to work with the lead author for the region, Dr. Yuan De Ruan, to finalize the regional review, taking into account also the many good comments received today. Thank you once again to all our panelists, to our moderator, to the ones who worked hard behind the scenes to make this webinar happen. And if you like, we look forward to seeing you later today at 13 hours Central European time for the Europe webinar. And there are others this week that I encourage you to attend. Definitely don't miss our Thursday Global Synthesis webinar, again at 13 hours Central European time. So this concludes webinar number 1 of 7. Goodbye for now, stay safe, and see you soon online again. Back to you, Miao. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias, for those closing remarks, appreciating the region's great progress in maintaining aquaculture growth and contribution, emphasizing the major challenges and also the priority actions needed, and reiterate FAO's continued support to the region for the sustainable growth of aquaculture, and also the way forward with the finalization of the regional review and the preparation of the global conference next year. So finally, my special thanks to the authors, to all the panelists, as well to the VIP for their important input intervention into this webinar. And I just want to again to remind all the participants there will be 6 more webinars this week. So hopefully we'll see you in those webinars, and take care and stay safe. Goodbye. Thanks.